From equipment to technique to editing, I'm going to show you guys everything that you need to know about iris photography. You can use this in your own home with your family members, or if you're thinking of starting up an iris portraiture business, then you can use this as the foundation for a lot of your processes when you're opening your own studio. Stick around and I'll get started in just a sec. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and welcome back to another macro photography tutorial where today we're doing something really special. It's going to be a really in-depth tutorial on exactly how you can get those professional level iris portraits that you see ever more commonly on the high street. It's a very popular thing at the moment to be setting up iris studios where you can go and have your picture taken but just of your eye, and then they can edit them into these beautiful portraits with all sorts of detail unique to you. I'm going to show you how you can do that at home, or if you're thinking of getting into the iris portraiture studio business, then you'll be able to use all of the techniques and equipment that you see here today to go ahead and set up your own business. I'm here in the Adaptalux HQ where we do all of our product assembly because I've assembled a little iris portraiture booth to answer some of the questions that we get asked increasingly often. How do we use this lighting to create those professional level iris portraits that you see in the high street iris studios? We've got a lot of our lighting products in the hands of these studios, and quite honestly, we didn't really know the techniques that they were using until now. I've taken the time to try and figure it out, how they're using our lighting to create these iris portraits. So I'm going to give you all of those answers step by step. So here is my little iris photography booth, and if you're sat at home thinking that looks really complicated and time consuming, then don't worry. You don't need anything quite as elaborate as this if you're just playing around with iris photography at home. However, if you are planning on doing this professionally and having customers come in to have their eyes photographed, then you definitely want something that looks similar to this. Probably more professional than this because this is quite hastily put together for the purposes of demonstration, but it does work as a proof of concept for the techniques that we're about to talk about. So let's take a look at this equipment setup in more detail and show you everything that you'll need to do some iris photography. Starting with the most obvious, this is a headrest. This is really important for reducing movement of your subject. Now, we did purchase this one. It is a proper optometrist's headrest. It's got some height adjustment just here for the chin rest. So your chin goes on here and your forehead rests against here. This is going to reduce any movement of the body. If you were trying to do this stood up, the person will be swaying from side to side, even just a little bit, and they will also be moving back and forth. Both of those things will ruin your shot. You'll lose your focus if they move forward to back, and you'll lose your composition if you happen to have them sway left to right. So this will help to keep everybody's heads nice and steady. If you don't want to do anything quite as professional as this, you can stand somebody with their back against the wall and press their head back against the wall as well, and that will at least reduce the movement front to back. Let's talk about the box, and it is quite literally just a box. It was once a side table. It had a shelf in it, and we've repurposed this to suit our needs. But there is a couple of reasons why we need something like this. I would recommend getting something a little bit more professionally made than this one, but it's very important to cut out any reflections. So when your face is in here and your eye is somewhere around here, you're not going to get any reflections from any of these ambient light sources like the windows and the fluorescent lights. The only light that's going to be falling on the eye is that which we create in here. You just need to avoid having any windows or light sources behind the camera that could still reflect on the eye. So we're reducing reflections by having a nice surround like this just around people's heads. The second reason for this is privacy. So it's actually quite a vulnerable position to have your face in one of these things, having cameras and lights pointed right at your eyes, especially if you're doing this in a customer-facing environment like a shop front where there might be other customers or family members gawking at you while you're having your photograph taken. Having a little surround like this makes it just a little bit more private, it makes it a little bit more intimate with the photographer, and it does keep people focused on the task at hand, which is looking down the lens. So it definitely serves two really important purposes there, especially if you're trying to set this up as an ongoing studio setup. Now let's move around to the back with the more complicated parts, the photography equipment. So obviously you're going to need a camera. Which camera you choose is not too important, but I would definitely recommend some sort of DSLR or mirrorless camera where you can change lenses. This is really important because the lens choice is very, very critical for how successful you're going to be. We do need to set all of this up on some sort of stand. Now I would call this a temporary solution, but we've got one of our mini tripods here, which just happens to raise this up to the perfect height for people's eyes. Now, more importantly, in between the mini tripod and the camera, we have a focusing rail. Now, this is really, really useful for finding the focus on the eye and also finding the location of the eye. So you can move the camera both side to side and front to back to really nail in the exact position of the iris. You would ideally also want some height adjustment on this, but I've just so happened to find the perfect spot just by changing the legs on the tripod. So I am using a Sony a7 III, which is a mirrorless camera, and I do have it plugged in so that I can use this all day without having to worry about the battery. I've also got it plugged into a remote shutter release cable, but you might want to replace that with a permanent setup of a computer so that your camera is going to feed those images directly to the computer and you can review them and edit them right there in situ. That's very much a permanent setup that you could have in your Iris Studio. Right, finally, we're on to the lighting. This is probably the most critical part of getting a setup like this working. And as you can see here, we've got the Adaptalux Studio control pod. So I'll get this out in a moment and give you a better look, but essentially what we have here is a power and control unit sat on the hot shoe of the camera, and that's feeding through two flexible lights so that we have two pinpoint, very small light sources right next to the subject's eye. This is again plugged in so that we've got constant power. I'm just feeding that off a little extension lead just here, but again, you'll probably want to do some wire management and tidy all of this up so that it looks nice and professional. Now that we've pulled the camera out of the surrounds, let's take a look at the lens choice here. This is a Tokina 100mm f2.8 macro. So this is a macro lens, and I would definitely recommend searching for a macro lens that suits your needs. Having that ability to get really, really close up without having to use any kind of digital zoom is really, really important. This is actually a Nikon Fit lens on a Sony camera, so we do have a little adapter ring there, but if you're choosing the lens for your camera for this purpose, there's a couple of things that you need to consider. Firstly is that magnification factor. How close can that lens get in terms of its magnification? How big is the iris actually going to show up on the sensor? You want that as big as possible without it running over the edges of the sensor. You need it nice, large iris in the middle of your shot. The next most important factor is your working distance. When you're setting up something like this, working distance becomes really, really important. The working distance is how far in front of the lens it's going to focus. So my working distance is here, which is around 20 to 30 centimeters. So I've got quite a nice working distance between the front of the lens and the person's face. The closer you get, the more uncomfortable they're going to be. And some macro lenses are going to want you to be right up close, which is really not ideal, especially when it comes to lighting. As you can see, our lighting is nice and flexible, and it comes down here to point at the person's eye. Right here is where the face would be, so there's a nice little gap between the lighting and the person's eye, and then the lens as well. Lastly, for our setup, let's talk about the lighting, probably the most important part of iris photography, certainly the trickiest part to get right and to be able to do consistently. And that's really important for being able to shoot customers' eyes. You need that consistency, you need lights that you can rely upon. So we've got the AdaptLux macro photography system just here. This is a miniature lighting studio designed just for macro, and this is perfect for that iris photography lighting that is so hard to find because we've got two flexible lighting arms. Up here we've got the control pod, which provides the power and the control, including Bluetooth control, which we'll come on to in just a moment. But then into that can plug up to 5 lighting arms. For iris photography, we just need 2 lighting arms, so 2 lights, one on each side of the eye. You can see that those are nicely flexed down here so that they sit in that working distance between the front of the lens and the eye, and it's that part that is so tricky to find. You need to be able to place these lights exactly where they need to be, because each light is going to create a tiny little catch light, a little highlight and reflection in the eye. So to be able to move that around is critical. I'll put a link to this lighting system down in the description. This exact setup just here is available, and you can go and grab one of these and get started with iris photography straight away. So I'll put that link down in the description and up in the top right hand corner. Now that we've covered the equipment, we can talk about the method, and there is a very specific method of how to capture these very professional looking iris photographs. It's pretty tricky. If anybody's tried to capture an iris photo before, you'll know all about that pesky little reflection that shows up from whatever your light source is. In portraiture, people like that reflection. They call it a catch light, and it gives a little bit of life to the eye. However, when you're getting this close up and you're trying to capture the iris, that reflection, it gets in the way, it removes a lot of the detail, and it's very distracting in the final image. So we're going to aim to remove that. And here's the trick. We're actually taking 2 photographs. We're going to light from 2 different directions and create 2 catch lights, and then we're going to blend them together later on to create a single image without any catch lights. So we've got those 2 lighting arms that I mentioned, and we're going to be using them both, but we'll be using them one at a time. First, we're going to light from one direction, then we're going to light from the other direction. And this is where Bluetooth comes in. It's really important to be able to control our lighting, and it's really handy to be able to do that without having to touch all of this setup and manually change all of those lighting settings. We're going to go through taking this photograph step by step, and I've placed you in the point of view of having your iris photographed so that you can see all of this from the subject's point of view. The first thing that I need to do is turn on one of these lights. You can see that there's 2 lights there and they're both turned off. So I'm going to select one of these lights on my phone and turn it up just a little bit. It's important not to go all the way with the lights straight away, because it is a little bit uncomfortable having bright light shined into your eye, and you just need enough light to be able to compose and focus. We can turn up the lights for better settings just momentarily when we're ready to take our shot. So the first thing that I'm going to do once my light is on is to adjust my camera. I can change the position, line everything up using my macro rail, and then I can happily be able to see that my eye is both in the center of the frame and in focus, and that focus is really important. You might need to use a focus peaking setting on your camera or something like that, because everybody is going to sit at a slightly different depth, and macro lenses have a very narrow depth of field. I'm shooting at f11, which does give me a decent depth of field, but you might want to shoot on an even bigger f number than that, just to be able to get as much of the eye in focus as possible. It's worth taking the time to focus properly now, because once you've taken your shot and you realize it's out of focus, there's nothing you can do about it. Now that I'm ready to take my shot, I've got my shutter release cable here ready to go. I'm going to turn up my lights. So just momentarily, I'm going to warn the customer that the lights are about to get brighter. I'm going to turn up this light. And The first thing that you'll notice is that is a much brighter light, but it still gets brighter than that. We can turn on boost mode. So at this point, the iris is going to contract. The pupil will get much smaller. The light is going to make your eye go really, really small and show us all of that iris. You want to leave them here for a couple of seconds just before you take your photograph to make sure that the pupil is not only as small as it can be, but also stable. If the pupil contracts and dilates while you're taking your shots, they won't line up properly later. So once you're ready to take your shot, you can hit the boost mode button, which is going to practically double or triple the brightness, and you'll be able to get a really nice shot with a lot of good settings. Make sure you expose for this in advance, and you can then leave your settings on manual, ready for this amount of brightness when you take your shot. I'm ready to go. So I've taken my first shot. Then very quickly, I'm going to turn off boost mode just to make the subject a little bit more comfortable without that bright light shining in their eye. The next step is to turn off this light and turn on the other one. So we're going to do the exact same thing again, just with the light on the other side. I'm going to warn the customer and then hit the boost mode, then hit the shutter release. Easy peasy, and we can turn them all back down again. Once you've got to this stage, you should have two photographs of the same eye, and you need to check on the back of the camera that they both look good, they're both central, and that there's enough of the iris showing that you'll be able to get a good cutout later on. Let's get you out of there. Hopefully that wasn't too claustrophobic, but as you can see, this process can take just as little as a few minutes. It's not too complicated. Once you've got all of this set up and ready to go, you can get somebody's eye photographed in just a couple of minutes. Next, let's talk about editing. I'm going to jump over to the computer and get started because there is a lot to cover. So here we are with two images of the same iris, and you'll see here as I switch them, the light is coming from two different directions and that little reflection is moving. What that leaves us with is a full amount of detail on the iris. I can move this and still have a reference area from what's underneath this little reflection, and we're going to be using that. But first we need to process our raw images. You can do this however you like, but you do need to make sure that both of your images are selected when you're making adjustments. I've upped the contrast quite a lot. I do find that that makes everything stand out a lot more in this detailed area here. We're really only looking at what this section just here looks like. We don't need to pay attention to the rest of the eye or the eyelid. Down here we also have some effects adjustments, so I've upped the texture, clarity and the dehaze just to bring out as much detail in there as possible. And here's an important part that you might find really helpful, the denoise. So this AI denoise function that we've now got in Camera Raw is really handy. We can come in here and make sure that we've got a nice sharp image with very little noise just by adjusting this. You want to make sure that this is as low as it possibly can be while still taking out any noise that we've got here. So you can just hit enhance and it's going to create two brand new photographs that we can take off into Photoshop. So here we are in Photoshop with those two images loaded up, and the first thing that we need to do is put them into a single file and to line them up. So I'm just taking a look here at which one of these I prefer. It might be that one of your images has slipped slightly on its focus, or maybe it just looks better in this particular iris from lit from a particular direction. So do take a quick look and see which one you prefer. I think I prefer this one. So I'm going to go over to the other image and I'm going to grab it and drag it onto the first one. Now we need to line these up, and the way that I like to do this is just to lower the opacity and manually align the two images. Now this can be a little bit tricky. There's probably a better way to do it, maybe using Photoshop's built-in alignment tools, but for the sake of this demo I'm just going to try and align this myself. So give me a moment and we'll come back when it's all aligned. Our images are perfectly aligned, and flicking between them you can see that reflection move from side to side along with some of the subtle shadows inside the iris, but that's not going to make too much of a difference. So the next thing that we need to do is isolate this iris from the rest of the eye. We don't need all of these eyelids and eyelashes, so I want to unlock my background layer, grab both of these images, and then hit the circular marquee tool. I want to hold Shift and drag out a circle, which is perfectly circular, but I need to align that with the very center of the pupil. So we're actually going to transform the selection there and try and align this as neatly as possible with the center of the pupil. I wouldn't worry too much at this point about cutting off extra detail around the edges of the eye. No eye is perfectly circular, so what we actually want is this area here to be perfectly center. So if you have to lose a bit from the edges, that's fine. We also don't want any extra white coming into the edges of the image, and darker areas towards the edge of the iris can also be cut out. So I'm thinking that that leaves us pretty well central in here, just eyeballing it here, haha, no pun intended. And then we need to select good on that selection. The next thing to do is to isolate all of this from the rest. So I want to, with both of my layers selected here, create a group, and then I'm going to mask that entire group using the selection we just made. So that gives us a nice isolated iris with nothing else. I can just go ahead and crop this down to give us a nice square image. Again, aligning that pupil in the middle there with the center of your image. I'm going to hit good on that one, and you can see that we've got a much closer representation to those iris shots already. We're missing a black background, so I'm just going to use the rectangle tool set on black and drag that over to create a nice black square, which can be dragged underneath our entire group. Now this is an isolated background from our two images, which are still inside here, and I can still flick between them. Now there is a little bit more masking to do here, so we've still got that reflection, but this is where the magic happens. I'm going to select my top layer, hit the mask tool, which creates a nice white mask, and then using the paintbrush tool with black selected, I can just paint out that reflection on the top. Now it is as simple as that. If you've got any stray eyelashes, reflections of eyelashes like we do in this bottom image just here, you can also mask those out using the information from the other image. However, this is pretty much done. You can spend a little bit more time aligning everything, making sure that this is dead center. You can use rulers and all sorts of things to make sure that the center of the eye is the center of the image. That principle of using a mask to just remove one of the reflections by providing data from the bottom image here is the way that we're going to be doing this. So from this point on, everything else that you may want to do is optional. We've got a lovely iris portrait here, but you may want to make it a little bit more like digital art. The iris studios do like to add extra layers around the edges to make them look a little bit more fancy, a bit of a halo, taking some of the detail from in here and duplicating it over, or maybe fracturing it out. I've seen lots of those images as well. One more common thing that you may want to do is simply to blur this transition between the iris and the black here, and there's a couple of ways to do that. You can either feather your selection when you initially make it, or by selecting the actual mask over our group, we can simply blur that mask. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, and maybe a Gaussian blur over here, and you can see that that is just blurring that black and white transition. If I can find it, all we're doing here is blurring the transition, not the actual image. So because I've got just my mask selected, any blur that we're applying here is going to apply just to that edge, and you can see that it just makes a softer little look to the image. Whether you prefer that harsh transition or a softer one, I'll leave that up to you, but we have a nice iris portrait. Just a quick word on the different types of eyes then. We've got a few different shots here that I've taken of different people. We've got some nice greenish blue eyes, some brown ones, and then some blue eyes as well. And different people react differently to having continuous light shined into their eyes. You can see here that we do have a lot of light shining in here. The settings we've got are 1/100th of a second. We were shooting on f11, which is not passed through because of that Nikon conversion ring, and and then ISO 160. So there's a lot of light being shined into the eye here. It's not harmful, especially if it's only for a few moments like we were showing earlier on. The difference here though is the color of the eye. Fair-skinned people with light eyes, so blue eyes in particular, they're going to be a lot more sensitive to light being shone into their eye. So that represents a closed eyelid here. This is actually Sam's eye, and he was struggling to keep his eye open, whereas you can see these people here were more than comfortable opening their eyes all the way and letting all of that light in, whereas this blue eye is really sensitive to that light. So you may need a way to open up the eyelids here. You can do that either with your fingers or ask them to open their fingers. I always asking people to pull a surprised face, because when you ask people to open their eyelids, they don't know which muscles to use, but a surprised face will open up their eyelids more than enough to get a good shot of the iris. So Sam's here, unfortunately, I don't think are particularly useful. We may be able to just get enough detail from the center here, but would lose almost half of the surrounding iris because of those eyelids and the reflections that they create. Another way to combat this is, of course, to use flash. Now, you do need to shine light into their eyes in one way or another to make that pupil contract, but you can obviously replace these LED lights for flash lighting arms, for instance, and then that flash will happen much quicker than they're able to react, and it might be a little bit more comfortable. However, using the flash is a little bit more tricky than using the LEDs. Changing between the two sides can be a little bit trickier, and of course you can't see exactly what you're doing and how to expose before you take your image. So I prefer using the LEDs, but flash is definitely an option if you struggle with people being able to put up with light being shined into their eyes. I found that the vast majority of people were absolutely fine having their eyes photographed and having that light in their eyes, and I got some really good images. By now, you guys should have everything that you need to create some fantastically beautiful, colorful, and detailed photographs of the iris. I think that this, even casually, is a fantastic way to spend some time. Building up a semi-permanent setup like this means that you can get all of your family members involved and get some unique photographs of everybody's eyes. And everybody's iris is completely unique. You will be surprised at the differences when you get up close and see all of that detail. And I do think that this would make a fantastic gift if you did get the family involved. Having a nice selection of everybody's different eyes is a really fantastic gift to give to somebody, and I think a lot of people agree as well, which is why the business side of this is increasingly popular as well. So if you're setting up a business, you're definitely going to need some element of each of these things that we've talked about, because I think that this is the definitive way to get professional looking iris photographs. You're certainly going to need the lighting, some sort of shroud, a good camera, and a good macro lens. Whatever you choose to do with this information is up to you, but I would encourage you to at least dabble in some iris photography. It is fantastically interesting. And remember, if you do need some lighting for this setup, I have put that link down in the description to the exact setup that I've been using today that has produced all of these amazing images. I would like to know from you guys what you plan to do with your iris photography. How did you come to this video? Are you planning on setting up an iris photography studio? Let me know down in the comments. And if you found this video helpful, make sure to leave a like, hit the subscribe button so that you're here for more macro photography tutorials, ideas, and inspiration in the future. But for now, that is all I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.